All right, I am here for the next episode of the Powerless Podcast with James Mathewson, who's a former spokesperson for the Labour Party in the UK, author, writer, and TV broadcaster, author again of the books Wonder Boy, a collection of poetry about growing up on the autism spectrum, and Progressive Pragmatism, how we can work together and what we do next. What can we do next? Sorry. Really happy to have you on. How are you doing this early afternoon for you? How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm very warm. We're having an unseasonal heat wave in Edinburgh where I am. It's absolutely horrific. It's not meant to be, the temperature it is right now here, and everyone's kind of hating it. So we're getting through, but it's the middle of the Edinburgh Fringe as well at the moment, the Fringe Festival. So the streets are buzzing and everything's a good vibe. Well, until JD Vance got here, of course. But yeah,
that'll bring things down a peg. Yeah, that will certainly bring things down a peg. Well, I'm happy to have you on today, James. You reached out to me. We kind of discussed things after the Calvin Louise episode came out, and you sent over this article and thought it'd be a really good topic, especially for this show, where we can kind of dive into metal music, how metal, especially when it comes to Black Sabbath and the formative origins and that in general of how it's connected to the urban working class in Britain and why music has in some ways changed so much in the landscape of who maybe is at the forefront of it, kind of the material conditions behind that, and just politics and music in general for you.
Yeah.
As well as an opinion piece that it does go along with your book, Progressive Pragmatism. This isn't necessarily a new topic you've covered, but kind of criticizing the new idea of the. You make sure to not criticize the man himself personally, but but the new idea of the new left party for headed by James Corbyn and others. That one we might agree a little less on, but I love to hear your opinions on that because I find it very interesting. So I guess to start off here for you, as we kick things in, we'll kind of go over the first thing I just discussed. When did music, clearly you share this over, you saw the Calvin Louise interview. That's not exactly like an arena selling out band. They should be. So clearly you're into, heavier and alternative music. Where did that kind of come from for you? Were there some bands early on in your life that kind of brought you into heavy alternative spaces or got you passionate about music? Kind of where did that come from for you personally?
Yeah, I had to think about this recently, actually, and exactly why and how it started for me. For me, my first ever email address, we've all got that embarrassing Hotmail MSN address, right? Mine was James_Sabbath XXXXO whatever, and it was because I discovered Black Sabbath. I had an uncle who was great. He had a motorbike and he had long hair and he had a big beard. My uncle Gordon, and Uncle Gordon was a metalhead. And when I was about 9 or 10, he asked my mum's permission to take me to a gig, and that gig was Motorhead. And it was the week of the smoking ban had come into force in the UK, so people couldn't smoke inside anymore. And I remember standing there in Newcastle City Hall, waiting for this band to come on. All these old metalheads, with these leather jackets and everything. I was kind of in awe of it all. And then Lemmy came out, right? And all he did was he walked up to the microphone and he said, "You heard about this new smoking ban?" And then everyone went, "Boo," whatever, and he went, "Yeah, fuck it." And he lit up this cigarette, and the crowd went wild. The venue staff looked like they were going to, freak out, and went straight into Ace of Spades. And from then I was kind of like, wow, okay. And I'd always had that kind of edge of like, I don't know if it's the autism or whatever, but, I was rebelling at school. I didn't like the idea of the structures of the conventions and all the things you need to fit in with. And here was a band that was just representing that. They'd been living it. And then from there, it was on Sabbath, it was on Iron Maiden, it was on all the classics. And I really tried to keep up to date. I really have with stuff and my music. And bands like Calvin Louise, I'm really lucky I have people in my life who introduce me to them, because otherwise I wouldn't, with the time, with politics, with writing, it's very difficult to try and keep up to speed with stuff.
Yeah, especially in the kind of like saturated wealth of like, how music in a lot of ways with streaming now has become kind of content creation in of itself in some ways with how it gets promoted, whether or not bands want it to be that way, right? So yeah, it can be tough to keep up on, but yeah, that's really funny. That's such like that would be such a, it's almost like a caricature of what people think of when a young kid gets into metal, of like seeing somebody being rebellious, kind of like punk rock, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And that's so funny that Motorhead, Ace of Spades, what a classic first
Oh,
show as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Like,
And I've
you
still
can't.
got the vinyl. I've still got the vinyl that I got at that gig, the Bomber album with the artwork, which is, a big World War II bomber. It was just like, and it's a funny one because I was looking at it recently again and some of Lemmy's stuff, and he liked his World War II kind of German iconography. It's a bit like, oh, is this on the end?
Yeah.
But when you hear him speak about it, it was very clearly not like that for him, but it still would, I think, signpost the wrong people in the wrong direction, I think, sometimes. So you've got to be a bit cautious with the older stuff.
Well, and that's something, kind of getting into a little bit of like metal in the urban working class. What I find interesting, and this happens with everything, whether it's sports or music, but I saw it a lot when Ozzy recently passed away, is people claiming that someone like Ozzy Osbourne or other metal acts coming out of the 60s and the 70s, that they were never political, that music shouldn't be political, right? We hear art and sports and all these different things should be
Yeah.
political, when you and I both know, you working within political spaces, and myself just someone that pays attention to this fervently, is everything's political, right?
Of course it is.
Everything has implications, everything's influenced by one thing or another, or influences another thing. And so I find it interesting how, in this day and age, not that it wasn't like that before, like you said, I'm sure like Lemmy and Motorhead and a lot of other metal bands, with sort of the iconography they've used, that's part of the reason we've seen like a right-wing growth in
Yeah.
some ways, or apolitical quote unquote growth in metal over the past couple of decades. It's kind of that iconography without understanding where the music's come from.
Yeah.
I find it very ironic that people want to say that the band that created War Pigs is apolitical. But kind of like getting into this a little bit, why don't we give a little bit of background? But from your perspective of this Jacobin article or other just kind of sentiments and this in general, why has there been that shift, you think? Like, kind of, why do you think there's been such a shift from like this very working class aspect of Black Sabbath and so many other bands to kind of like the hyper commodification and hyper capitalization of heavier and alternative music, to a pretty stark difference,
I think part of it is the journey to international kind of recognition, right? The thing is, in Britain, and this is the starkest difference, that I work currently between political advisory stuff sometimes, and I work a lot of the time with Americans in that. And the starkest difference in understanding British culture versus American is that class system, or that, kind of the understanding of how deep ingrained class is in Britain as an issue. And it's something that often isn't talked about. And it might sound controversial to say, but I'm not equating the two in any way, but it holds a similar place in the British psyche as race does in America. It's that kind of deeply ingrained, about communities and separation of communities. Class is at the heart of the metal story and all music story in Britain, whether it be the Beatles coming out of Liverpool and working class backgrounds. But with metal, because metal was so much this opposition to like conforming with the things you had to do as a working class person, right? And the idea of being a rock star, of becoming this figure of excess and grandeur and rebellion, was kind of very much the antithesis of what it was to be working class. I mean, I've been told, and it happens from people in your own circles a lot of the time when you come from those communities, keep your head down, don't make a fuss. You're not here to be, loud and be recognized and all the rest of it. And I think that doesn't translate to America particularly well, because culturally, when I've worked with Americans have this great thing. It's the one thing I love, well, not the one thing I love about Americans, but one of the things I love about Americans is this actual like unashamedness to be ambitious and to be, especially even in progressive and left-wing circles. There's a real like, no, you should do this. There's a support of ideas, of projects, of all the rest of it. In Britain, we're just more miserable generally and kind of more, harsh on people's projects, on people's ideas. And if you're working class, it's even stronger. I came from a working class Northern Catholic background. And I mean, that was like, very much like you are here to suffer. You are here to work hard and then die. And that's your lot in life. Metal just threw in the face of that. I mean, if you listen to Ozzy Osbourne, there's been a huge amount of talk about Ozzy recently, obviously after his passing. But if you listen to him talk about where his life was before music, it was really dire straits. I mean, the guy was going to, be in a factory, he was in and out work, he was in prison for a bit because, he didn't want to do the things that he was expected to do to get by. And they'd all worked in factories around Aspen. in Birmingham. And I mean, these are communities where try and get people to understand this for an international audience, how deep work is in these communities, in the same work, whether it be coal mining, whether it be factory work. The accents of these communities, that famous Ozzy Osbourne Birmingham accent, right? It's so nasal, and the origins of that are believed to be because of the pollution of factories.
Wow.
The very sound that comes out of these communities, the very voices are impacted by labour, by work. Always those communities, ever since the Industrial Revolution, have had strong trade union links and strong, left-wing political links as well. So people just like to forget that, I think. And also some of the performers forget that. Ozzy Osbourne forgot that. Ozzy was supporting Conservative candidates up until recently in mayoral elections. Sharon Osbourne's always been right-wing. I mean, she was quite a prominent figure when British politics right-wing wise. So, it's their right to have their own views. Of course it is, and they might not align with everything, but the music and the origin of the music undoubtedly is politically progressive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the unfortunate reality for a lot of people. Once you get yours, suddenly it can be starkly different of how you view, like, your community or society or where you grew up or your origins or whatever the case may be. We've seen that time and time again from musicians, politicians, and everything in between. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for going over that. One thing that I liked they detailed, which I knew from this before reading this piece, but just reminded me of little things like Tony Iommi, like the reason why he plays the way he plays is because cut off a few of his fingertips in the factory, right? Yeah. Like that some of the beats that they got were from the repetitions that they heard through the floor and through the walls in the factories they're working in, right? Like these are things that are so idiosyncratic to the working class experience that, if Ozzy or any of these guys were not these, struggling working class individuals that were musicians, mm-hmm. the music would have been completely different. It wouldn't have possibly been as weird. It wouldn't have been as, innovative because it's something people weren't really doing before, right? Especially to the extent that they did with a lot of their earlier material, especially. I guess like going from that, we kind of discussed a little bit that on these bands' individual sides, more from like an individual perspective that, and, kind of being able to jump classes is where a lot of the change comes from on their end. But where do you see, especially in the UK, I know that much like in the United States here in the Rust Belt and things of that nature, there's obviously been a stark difference that's created the conditions we see now for kind of the difference of what working class people can do in their spare time or what they're able to create, out of work hours. Why do you think that has changed so much from, the 60s, the 70s to now? Do you think it's like a music industry thing? Do you think it's the, like the wealth disparity? Do you think it's deindustrialization? Is it all the above? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I think the crucial thing is the shift that has made it happen with music and who listens to it and who's drawn to it is because it's anti-establishment at its core. Whether it be punk, whether it be metal, whatever it is, it's anti-establishment. It's about, fuck the guys in power. Like, it's about, those people at the top of the tree. They need to get what's coming to them. This is the voice of normal people, ordinary people. And over the years, that has shifted. Whoever is in power is the establishment, right? And for like our generation, it's been largely liberal parties or liberal-minded people in power. And those working class communities were definitely left behind. We're in Britain. The Labour Party had this strange relationship of being like incredibly pro-worker and all the rest of it until it gets into power, and then it tends to just kind of, flip-flop and be watered down by the state and the function of the British state, which is a state that you have to remember is like, 1,000 years old. So it's, it's got deep-rooted issues in it. But I think for me, that shift has really been about who is in the establishment. And I look at it now and I think like, those generations that are coming up under Trump, that are coming up under, increasingly right-wing governments in Europe, I think they'll shift back. I would hope they would. I mean, we're seeing with the Gen Z lot that a lot of right-wingers, a lot of very far-right young people, which is concerning. But you have to remember, it's those that are born now and those that are having their formative years under these governments that will resist it and will ultimately be the rebellion. That's the swing of the pendulum politically that we always see. But I think metal and music and, whether it be folk protest songs, I mean, they had died out Yeah, but now I'm seeing, like, I don't know if you've seen this chap, something Wells, I think he's called.
Yeah, Jesse Wells. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. It's great. Brilliant. Like,
Yeah,
seeing his stuff.
literally writes a song a day, it seems like. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And they're
yeah.
great. Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I'm seeing him come out of, and he sounds like Bob Dylan. He looks like Bob Dylan. There's this kind of like, oh, okay, this feels like the 60s and 70s again. You can see the same movements happening. But, I think metal especially, because it has that power behind it, right? There's so much power and there's a lot of emotion in it. It's an emotional art form and an emotional type of music. And that's what really drew me to it. I love theatre. I love musical theatre as well, by the way. Like, I always did all the school shows, all the plays, everything like that. Because drama and whatever, it's operatic, and that's what metal is. It's dark and gothic and heavy. And that's its origins. And for me, that can go one of two ways, really. You can either lean into the anger of it, and I think there are some people who are, on the right, these kind of like neo-fash kind of like death metal guys who think that the genre is angry and it represents their anger. When I look at metal, I don't see anger, though. I see, expression and joy. And if you hear the guys from Judas Priest talk about it, openly gay, a celebratory of like queer joy. I mean, nobody would ever, associate that in their head automatically. And then you look at all the leather and you're like, right, okay, yeah, 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 okay, right, yeah, that makes sense. Maybe it was right in front of us the whole time. So I think people project onto an art form what they want to see. They do that with everything from religion to books to history. I think metal's not kind of any different, really. And unfortunately, I think they're in the minority compared to the majority. The metal community seem to be very accepting. I've never felt unsafe at a gig or a concert. In fact, women I know feel more safe at metal concerts than they do anywhere else, So we still have a lot of good in the community, but undoubtedly there has been a shift, and it's worthwhile understanding it, I think, rather than trying to just, criticize it immediately.
Yeah, I think it's something that I talked to somebody a while back on the show about, that was former musician turned political commentator in a different genre, but kind of talked about that this is a good reason of why it's good to use art as a listener, as a fan, that's politically active, as, like a great source of, catharsis, or might introduce you to some new ideas if you're, if you're new to kind of political movements and things of that nature, but that you shouldn't rely on necessarily artists to inform your political opinion solely, in that, like, there are other people that are also being influenced by these things. You're not, and it's not to there's something beautiful about that when they do go political, or they do make socially charged music, or they do stand for something, that they are just like you. They're normal, they're not an academic. They're not someone, with all respect to you, not someone that's worked in like a political party on a professional level necessarily, right? Like, they're people that are influenced by the world around them, and a lot of that kind of angst that people can have, unless they're politically informed, can just kind of go on the swings of whatever they deem to be anti-establishment, right? Like,
exactly.
Where that can be frustrating, I'm sure, for you or I, that like someone would go, what's really anti-establishment right now is more on the American perspective, I guess, for me, is like standing with Elon Musk and a bunch of other billionaires. That's the that is the that's standing up to the establishment. And it's like, I'm not quite sure you understand what the word establishment means.
The establishment is,
yeah.
I mean, I get it all the time in my debates. Whether I do on TV and, the regular slots and stuff. When I debate the real kind of right-wingers and the kind of far right at the moment, the kind of Charlie Kirks and we've got figures in Britain who are kind of mimicking that kind of style. One word that they use time and time again, and they'll describe me as it. They'll say, James and other people in the establishment. And I'm sitting here like, do you want to compare bank accounts? Because I'll show you right now what my overdraft's looking like. Who is the establishment here? Like, how can you think that you, as a rich, privileged person who went to private school and all this, is not the establishment, and that the establishment is a working class kid from a single parent household who accidentally ended up in politics? Like, how is that the establishment? But of course, because the views that I have, because being nice to people and being kind to people and trying to lead with compassion is an establishment mindset. It blows my mind. I'll never not understand it. But I mean, you're absolutely right. And comedians, by the way, that's the other thing as well. And the comedians, musicians, it's great when comedians wade in, but at the same time, you also have to remember, like, they're comedians. You know, they're not politically astute always. Some of them are very well versed in politics. Some of them aren't. But people are expressing their feelings. And if you were growing up, if you were in school right now, and everybody hates Elon Musk, everybody, like all the popular girls, you know, all the people that you've got a crush on, all the whatever, you know, and they're all like, oh, Elon Musk sucks, you know, left wing and all the rest of it. Then you probably think to yourself in your little private, you probably think, well, I'm going to be different. I'm going to be contrarian, you know. And if you are going to go down that route, then that's where you go. You go to the pro-billionaire side.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the word to use, even more than anti-establishment that these people think it is. It's just contrarianism a lot of the time, right?
Yeah.
Like I have to have what I view as the opposing quote unquote popular opinion, because that makes me the most interesting person in the room, right?
Oh yeah.
Even if it means I'm not the most loved person in the room.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, like I guess like from I just lost my train of thought here. But you know, going from that a little bit, I guess like what are your thoughts on, you know, this topic? And then we can kind of segue this into the other topic I want to talk to you about with you. I appreciate your time on this. Is kind of where partisanship plays a role in that sort of thinking, right? Like we just talked about and joked about how a rich, wealthy person on a right-wing news outlet or a major news outlet that I've seen some videos of you on where they get pretty mad at you. I was not prepared.
Oh, yeah.
I guess like UK politics, I guess I always forget like how much more brutal people are on like talk TV and talk news. It's crazy.
Yeah. I've had a few days where I've just been like, if you do 2 or 3 of them back to back and they're particularly charged, you think to yourself, nah, I can't. I'm just going back to bed. I can't do like, you know.
Yeah. I'm spent, right? I mean, I would be too.
Yeah.
But you know, kind of this idea of partisanship and how it leads into this kind of thinking, right? Where again, like someone private school, wealthy, maybe even, you know, grew up in wealth, has a cushy job at like a news station or as a hedge fund manager or whatever.
Yeah.
How that, from your perspective of someone that's worked in the Labor Party or has been a part of the left wing movement, like how that kind of feeds this idea that anti-establishment is just whoever's not in charge, or anti-establishment is through party lines and not through like a sort of class-based ideological lens, right?
Yeah.
How, do you like? I don't know. What's your perspective? Like, has that been expanded in the UK to the extent that it has in the United States? From your perspective, from the two different parties, where do you think that comes from in the modern era when it comes to people being able to kind of like, I don't know, bob and weave to create that narrative? Just kind of what are your thoughts on that? Someone that talks to these people a lot.
It is interesting because people don't realize, I think people will use terms, right, like working class or whatever, and it means something in somebody's head, right? They envision something when they think of that. And the big battle, and this comes on a bit of the Corbyn stuff, which we'll touch on as well, but my big battle on the left and on the left of British politics, because when I came into politics, I was like 17, 18. I was working in a car park hut in the middle of rural Northumberland, right? Middle of nowhere, beautiful coastline. And when a car pulled up, I used to have to give a ticket to the car and they would give me £2 and I would put that in a tin. That was my job, right? And I was there for 8 hours. I had no electricity, no heating, and I would just sit in this hut and read books because that's all I had. And I hadn't been reading much up till then, other than when I was a kid. So I started reading politics books and just getting interested in it. And fast forward a year later, I'm like a die-in-the-wall Marxist. You know, I've read everything from Che Guevara's Motorcycle Diaries to Marx several times to Thomas Sankara, you know, the African revolutionary. All of these people who've informed my worldview, and I'm strong. And then I get bored, and I'm like, how do I challenge myself? I'm going to read all the right-wing stuff, right? So I read all that stuff. I read Adam Smith, and I read various different things. And you know, I'm like, okay, I know what I believe. I'm going in the Labour Party. And I go in the Labour Party, and I work in the Labour Party, work around the Labour Party for those next few years. And when I'm in London, when I'm in Westminster, mixing with other Labour people, it absolutely blows my mind, fascinates me that, you know, obviously it's a big movement, it's a big tent, and it's a wide political spectrum. But there are people genuinely in that party who are like Marxists and who agree with me politically, but are literally aristocrats, or their parents. One of them, you know, a girl who I knew quite well, her dad had an original Picasso in their bathroom.
Yeah.
Like, these people are like generational wealth through the roof. But then in private, at the dinner parties, they're saying, we need an armed revolution. We need to arm the working class. And I'm coming down on the train to London from, deindustrialized Northeast, which was coal mine and now has nothing because Thatcher decimated the communities and all the rest of it. And I'm coming from that, and I'm seeing these people, and I'm like, you don't know the working class. Why would you want to give guns to the working class? They would kill you. They're not in agreement with you. They don't share your My family don't share your politics. Like, most of my, former coal miner uncles or family members are very right-wing, very anti-immigration. A lot of them racist. Like, very similar to the likes of the Rust Belt in America.
Mm-hmm.
And yet this intellectual left-wing attitude, this upper-class left-wing attitude was automatically the working class want to be freed from their chains because Karl Marx says so. And you would have to remind these people, Karl Marx is dead. Karl Marx hasn't, seen the impact of deindustrialization on Britain. He hasn't seen the impact. So all of those shifts that have happened that people just don't seem to be aware of, and they still use terms like working class to mean left-wing. And it doesn't synonymously. That's why we're seeing the rise of, we're seeing the rise of Donald Trump. We're seeing the rise of Nigel Farage in the UK and the Reform Party, because they're telling working class communities what they want to hear and what many of them have been saying for many years. And unfortunately, it's very uncomfortable for lefties because it's not what we think. But you know what we haven't done, and this is my biggest bugbear on the left. I believe this is in America with the Democrats, with the Labour Party in Britain. We've tried to pivot to it and try and speak their language rather than trying to make the case. And that's the biggest flaw. That is fundamentally the problem. You need to make the case. Nigel Farage has made the case for why immigrants are bad. Donald Trump has made the case for why immigrants are bad. And they've heard him and they've gone, there's a man who believes what he says. And he's not afraid to say it. That's what they've heard. And they've heard authenticity. And they're looking for something in a very uncertain world. Certainty looks like Donald Trump. Certainty looks like Nigel Farage. Keir Starmer, Joe Biden, do they look certain? No, because they're not certain. Because what they're saying, they don't even believe in. They're trying to pivot left, right, and centre and trying to win votes all over the. And it's a complete lack of authenticity and backbone. And I think that's the biggest problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it on that. It's interesting, again, here from the American perspective, post Kamala Harris losing the election in November, pretty, closer than people want to admit popularity vote wise, but like lost every swing state. It was, it was not close from how our horrible election system is.
Yeah.
And a lot of people's first responses were, you talk about immigration. That's another one that they tried to do beforehand. They tried to outflank the right on immigration. It's like, no, you're not going to get any of them because they're not going to believe you, because they shouldn't. Your base doesn't want that. So you're the next thing they did, and I've seen people that you already know are trying to find her in favor for a 2028 race, is throwing trans people under the bus. It's like, so what you took away from losing was that we need to be more spiteful and more hateful to certain groups. And then people that are already that way with their own party will suddenly jump over to us for reasons, And it goes back to that thought of authenticity, I think, a lot of the time, because when you have the quote unquote left-wing party, whether it's under Keir Starmer, Joe Biden, or iterations previously, I mean, you can even point to a lot of critiques of Tony Blair in the UK or Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. The economic conditions did not improve and meet the moment, right? You might have had improvements, but as the situation becomes more dire, people have there's further economic instability and further, wealth gaps and everything in between. Like, you have to have bigger and bolder plans economically, right? Along with not throwing marginalized people under the bus. That's the message. The message is, I'm here to make everybody's life better. But when you don't do that and you just continue to capitulate because you have, like you said, whether they're the Marxists in the banquet halls, pseudo Marxists, I would call them probably, right? Or like out and out autocrat neoliberals, they're not meeting the moment. They're not connected to the struggle of the working class person, and it shows, right? And so that's something that I think about a lot, about how, the irony of how bleak things are, that you got Nigel Farage and Donald Trump, and one of the things that all of their base would say first and foremost that they like about them is the word authenticity, which is just
they're real, not a
yeah,
politician, you know.
yeah, not a politician, just
Yeah,
billionaires and
yeah, who are now politicians.
who are now politicians, and one of them had been elected to the office for 4 years prior.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that's just the contradictions we find ourselves in, right? And so that kind of delves into, there's a quote that I think of a lot from Ta-Nehisi Coates that talked about the Democratic Party, and you can probably relate it to the Labor one. I should have typed it in here before I started this recording, but it was something to the effect of people are wondering how the Democrats are not able or not meeting with the times to save democracy. I would present to you that if the line is not genocide, if you can't expect them to stop genocide, how can you expect them to save democracy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that in the Labor Party as well, and a lot of people have a lot of different ideas on the left, especially the ideological left, not partisan political party left, about what the step is to do to make things better politically, right? People want to start third parties. People want to do mass movements. People want to try to work within the system that's already created. I know things are not 1-to-1 because the UK is not quote unquote a 2-party system, but it basically is, much like Canada. There's some people that get elected for some minor things, but that's just basically the difference by and large. And we've seen, Corbyn and Sultana, right? Is that her?
Sultana.
Yeah. Kind of being at the forefront of starting this new political project. I think something of 600,000 or something like that. Signatures within a day or two or something like that. I'm probably getting those exact things wrong.
Yeah.
And you, as someone who had worked in the Labor Party during Corbyn, a left-wing person that has said some, I always like in your interviews that you're very clear. You're like, I'm not in any way ripping on this person's ideology or their conviction as an individual, but you do critique the idea of this party, right? And that even goes back a little bit to your progressive pragmatism book that I found interesting. So kind of give me your case, give people a little background that might be, American audience that don't pay attention to UK politics the way I do, kind of the background on this, and then your thoughts on why this is not the way forward.
Right. So for me, and the reason why, and it brings me absolutely no joy to ever do this. The left shits on itself enough and eats itself enough already without other people coming in and do it. But there are some points where you look and you think, I can't not say anything about this, because I was a part of the Corbyn project insofar as I worked for a member of parliament who was very close to Jeremy and who ended up in Jeremy's shadow cabinet, and who was basically, a very close ally, one of 4 MPs who were very close allies of Jeremy. Jeremy Corbyn took over the leadership of the Labour Party after a member vote, which kind of significantly put him in the leadership of the party. People wanted to go left after years of kind of just wandering around trying to work out what the Labour Party was, what it wanted, and all the rest of it. So they wanted to go left in the wake of years of Tory austerity. I was one of those people, voted for Jeremy, campaigned for Jeremy and his leadership. And we had then 2 general elections. So our general election cycles are 4 years, but we had a huge amount of chaos under various Conservative prime ministers where we had quicker elections sooner or later. And we had a period of 2 elections within 2 years of each other. So we had 2017 and 2019. For both of those, Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party, the official opposition. If we had won either of those elections, Jeremy Corbyn would be prime minister. That's how it works. It's not presidential. Obviously, some of your listeners and your viewers will know this, but it's not. You're not voting for a person. You're voting for a party. So people who vote for the Labour Party return the Labour Party. The leader of the Labour Party then becomes the prime minister and forms a government. 2017, we were close enough so that my boss at the time, who was the chair of the Labour Party, that was his position, and he was in charge of the campaign for that general election. He and others decided to put us on a campaign footing, a permanent campaign footing between 2017 and 2019. It was known that because the Tories had won with such a slim majority and they had to be propped up by a Northern Irish unionist party as well in a supply and confidence deal. Because of that, it was known they would crumble at some point. So we wanted to be ready and campaigning. It was exhausting. Those years were absolutely exhausting, emotionally, and everybody in the party who worked for the party, who worked for MPs in the party, were tired. It was a tiring period. We lost in 2019 really badly. It was a historic defeat. People didn't want what we were offering. We were offering, I don't believe too much, but the manifesto was very radical. And I don't think that was the problem. It was more the communications around it. It was kind of out of step with things. We were offering things like free broadband internet to everybody in the country. Fantastic on paper, right? But you're taking a population that has been told that that disabled people can't have benefits for the past 10 years, right? And then you're trying to tell them, by the way, everyone can have free internet. Nobody believes you. You can't just step like that straight into an alternate vision. People weren't ready for it. People didn't want it. And also there were questions around Jeremy. And by that point, I think the leadership had taken its toll on him. It's a lot of pressure on one person. It was almost Messiah-like. You know, there was this kind of cult of personality around him and everything weighed on him. And he's a human being who's flawed. Everybody is. And I don't like the personality stuff in politics. I prefer parties or movements to have the support rather than people, because everything ties to that one person then. So my problem with this new party is that the best way to get American viewers to understand this, imagine if Bernie Sanders had won his Democratic nomination, and for 2 general elections, this would never happen in America, but in 2 general elections, he was the Democratic candidate and he was beaten twice at 2 general elections. Would you then go on to support him in creating a new project outside of the framework and the infrastructure that already exists that was most likely in the 2-party system to get him elected? I don't think in our current system there's a chance in hell that a party led by Jeremy Corbyn will do better outside of the Labour Party than it would inside. And that's the unfortunate reality for me. So I don't want people to put all up, because there's parties like the Greens. The Greens are doing fantastic work. They're about to elect a guy, Zach Polanski, probably, who's going to be a really, really interesting young kind of fresh face in politics. There's all sorts of work happening on the left. And I just think it's really annoys me, to be honest, because it's kind of like, look, we know Jeremy had his moment and his time and his chance. But I know that this is people around Jeremy. I've seen them, people that your audience certainly won't know. British audiences don't know. These names and these faces that I've seen time and time again, who want Jeremy to be there, who want to be the victim because their careers depend on it. It's a vanity project. I believe it's a vanity project. I believe it's all about ego. It's about certain people dominating the limelight and factional disputes on the left itself. And as a result, I can't support it. I don't support it.
So there's some things you said there that I absolutely agree with, and I appreciate you going into the background on that as well, because that helps out, I think, the audience and myself kind of understand a little bit better the details. But I think there's a few things from my perspective. You can tell me where I'm wrong. There's a few things there that I would disagree with the analogy, and also with the kind of thought on this being solely a vanity project. And that is that I don't know that in 2025, whether in America or the UK, that we can do a 1-to-1 with the movement. So in essence, if things went as usual, we didn't have a pandemic, we didn't have us bankrolling the most live stream genocide, we didn't have all these crises coming in and manufactured outrage from right-wing people in power, whether it's Nigel Farage with the Reform Party, a lot of different Tory members, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, who's in your neck of the woods as we speak today. I think there's been, and maybe I'm naive, right? Because although I'm pretty black-pilled when it comes to electoral politics, being from the United States, but I don't know that we can do a 1-to-1 there. Like a lot of people in left-wing spaces here, not that necessarily means it's correct, but a lot of people talk about that, the what if of after 2016, where Bernie Sanders, for all intents and purposes, had the nomination taken away from him at the DNC much more than 2020, that if he had started a political movement right then and there, that to this point there would be a lot of a larger coalition of progressive or left-wing or working class people, because we've seen that in the polling, right? We've seen that right-wingers that like Donald Trump did the primary and voted for Bernie because they liked the working class politics, right? And now we're at this point, like I said earlier, with like the quote from Ta-Nehisi Coates, where we've got both the Labor Party and the Democratic Party in the previous term full tilt supporting, live stream genocide that's on our phones that everyone can see for the first time really in human history to this degree. So I think one thing internationally that Corbyn, and I do agree with you, one thing that we absolutely agree on is don't make political movements about people solely. You do have to have leaders,
Yeah.
but they can't be the focal point, right? Because
Yes.
people are flawed, things change. You always need somebody new coming in. You need new ideas coming in. You need a coalition. But one thing internationally that has made Corbyn so singularly appreciated, I think, even in comparison to, say, an AOC or Bernie Sanders by a long stretch, is his stance on Gaza, his foreign policy beliefs there, right? And that, you know, I know foreign policy, we probably both know foreign policy is not what people vote on, right? But it is nonetheless, it is nonetheless an exceedingly important issue for both the UK and the United States. And actually, you know, if you could, like you said, it's not about capitulating, it's about sending, you know, messaging and doing correct messaging. And if you can message things like, you're worried about you want to contextualize immigration, or you think immigration is an issue, well, here's how the United States and the UK make people's lives all over the place in different countries worse, to where they feel like they have to flee their home and their culture to come to your country. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to say it's bad that immigrants are coming, but it's the point to show that why these people need to come to a different area for try to have a better life, right? And it's an economic issue. It's, you know, all these different things all tied in with war, with trade policy, with everything in between. And so I think people now more and more, especially post October 2023 and the pandemic in conjunction, are viewing politics from a less, I mean, people are becoming more partisan at the same time, but I think different sects of people in a growing population of younger people, or people that are less involved in sort of the mainstream of politics and the horse race of it, are viewing things differently. And so while I would not sit here and claim that this new party from Corbyn is the answer, or that they would win, or anything in between, I think people are so hungry for something like that. And I did see an interview where he kind of talked about why they're doing this party, and they're going to do a lot of coalition building with the Greens, but there's a distinct reason why they were doing it separately. I'd have to go back and read the details of that. But people are so hungry for something that is not the Labour Party, that is not the Democratic Party, and this would never happen in the United States with our structure. I know it's very tough for it to exist even in the UK, but I think people are so hungry for it that you know, it feels, I could see where you could call it a vanity project, but I think a lot of people are just so hungry for something different that they don't believe they will ever get from the Labour Party after the last several years, you know?
I think you are right. People are. I mean, you see that from the sign-ups. They had 600,000 people sign up. I mean, it was you know, posted incorrectly as members by some people. It's not members. Obviously, the party hasn't been created yet, but it's interest. You know, it's people registering interest. Problem is, for me, with that, under Jeremy's leadership in the Labour Party, we had the biggest figures of any political party in Europe. We were the biggest political party in Europe, membership-wise. We had over 600,000 members in the Labour Party under Jeremy. It was fantastic. What did that mean? Logistically, it was a nightmare. It was worse than having less members, I'll be totally honest. You don't need members to win elections, you need voters. And that was my big lesson that I learned at that time, because I thought, we've got the members, it's great, fantastic. How many of them came out to door knock? How many of them came out to canvass? You know, out of that, you know, probably like maybe a third, you know, if that. And out of that third, you know, it's very hard to manage those mass movements. And Jeremy has this thing, you're absolutely right, foreign policy-wise, he's been bang on most things for like the past 30 or 40 years as an MP. He's been a voice in Parliament after the late Tony Benn passed, who was a political hero of mine. Tony Benn was kind of his mentor in Parliament. And he took on many of Tony Benn's lifelong campaigns, you know, against war and against all the rest of it. One of my things I always disagreed with Jeremy on is he's a pacifist. He doesn't believe in war at all. I'm not a pacifist. I can't be. I believe in arming Ukraine. I believe in fighting against Russian invasion, any invasion of a sovereign country. I believe in the cause of World War II. I believe in that was a just fight and a just struggle against fascism, even though that wasn't everyone's motive for being involved in World War II. But for me, I've always had those differences, and I think that there is a naivety with Jeremy around some aspects of that and around like peace building, to a point where many people who were around his leadership, and who, by the way, who like Jeremy and care about him, because the second that you criticize now, like I have, I lost 4,000 followers on Instagram, and I had people calling me a Blairite and a right winger. It's just not true. Like,
Right.
I have one difference in opinion about who should be leading this movement, and that's it.
Right.
But a lot of them are very fixated on the personality. It becomes a kind of cult of personality, which isn't helpful to the movement. And Jeremy knows that. Jeremy would be great as a kind of presidential figure, like in the sense of like a head of state, like Michael D. Higgins in Ireland, a kind of, symbolic role, somebody who you can look to as a moral compass, all the rest of it. But the actual logistics of politics, the dirty work, the campaigning, the electioneer, all of that stuff you have to do, the fight that you have to be, I don't think the man has the stomach for it. He's not a fighter. He's not somebody who likes getting down in the dirt and scrapping. It upsets him. He gets upset by it. You can see that. And you can see that in his manner. It really upset him. I don't know why he's want to put himself forward for this again. And in my mind, there's a concern that it would be the same repeat pattern, which was about this obsession with, listen, I love democracy. Don't get me wrong. That democracy comes before my own personal politics for me. But democratizing a movement on the left, like obsessively and too much, just creates this mess of people because we know the left is incredibly divided on minute issues often, in a way that the right often isn't. They can pull things together and, just plow ahead with different, fundamental differences. We on the left really struggle with that. We struggle that if somebody doesn't 100% agree with single thing we say, then they're a political adversary as opposed to an ally. We've never been able to get over that. And my concern with that is that with Jeremy is that, they're even going to put the name of the party out at their conference for a member vote. And that sounds lovely. Look, it sounds like a great club to be part of, a great society, a community, if you like. I don't want that from a political party. I want ruthlessness. I want to learn from the lessons of the past. I want a left-wing party that stands up and says, no, I'm sorry, there's bigger fights to be fought right now. And we're going to have to use the system that exists to win it. That's why I like looking to the likes of AOC and Zora Mundani. And they haven't had a choice. Like you say, what could you build outside of that system in the US? Nothing, that would ever really gain traction because of the system. So they've had to be inside the tent. They don't have the luxury of leaving it. And I think that's our problem here. We have the luxury of leaving it and going to our little society and our little club and where everyone agrees with us and we can all have nice chats. And I've seen it. We were doing it in the Labour Party, Jeremy. People were bringing jam and we were having fundraisers and we were like doing, kind of yard sales together and all the rest of it. Like, at the end of the day, we didn't win an election, so we didn't change any policy. There's no fewer homeless people in Britain because of that yard sale. There's no fewer, so I am incredibly skeptical and obviously, as you can hear, I don't need to tell you this, jaded about those years that we spent fighting for that. To a point where, for me, it comes down to one fundamental thing. Just give somebody else a chance. There's so much talent on the left. There are so many young, talented people who could be a fresh face, who are more in touch with what the country needs and what the country wants. But I totally agree with you that the appetite for this is huge. And whoever takes up that space, and it's going to be Jeremy and Zara, because they're going to take up that space. They're going to do it. People will vote and support them. Look, if they get enough traction, and people are, and it becomes evident that they're the one, then I'll back it eventually. Of course I will. But right now, in the formation of these things, I don't think it should be them.
I hear you. I really appreciate you breaking that all down. I think it's one of those deals for me where it always goes back to that we need far more political movement in both of our countries outside of the electoral political sphere, right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, whether it's, an upstart political party or someone who's the best person for the job to work within the system of a major party, it's not going to be what people are hoping it's going to be. I don't, whether it's, you can look at things, like you reference AOC or Zoran Mamdani. AOC we have more of a track with because she's been in federal politics for a lot longer. They do let you down. They let you down on big issues. They can capitulate to the people that you voted for them to kind of be a wedge against. I have hope for Zora Mandani as someone who is completely, like I said, completely jaded like yourself on all these different things. But I think we have to know that the reality is that this is a political tool, and people need to be more involved in, organizing outside of these systems that have failed people for so long, because the only thing that's going to break the apathy and the nihilism as material conditions deteriorate is the opposite, is going out and saying, if these people within these institutions aren't going to help those in need or better society or whatever level, local, province, state, whatever the case may be, we're going to do it, right? And so I think that is something that I'm at, like, I think about at the end of the day, is regardless of someone's opinion on working within the system or working outside the system, when it comes to electoral politics, the answer has to be that and and so, because if you talk solely about electoral politics, you either have the answers of working within these parties that have become so unmitigatingly unpopular, that are the neoliberal or liberal parties, that you're going to be up against so many obstacles, in Parliament or in Congress or in the executive branch. So yeah, I appreciate you breaking that all down. I don't know that I entirely agree, right? But I do really, really appreciate your insights on that.
It would be mad if we as two lefties agreed.
Oh, that would be crazy. You can't do that. You can't do that.
So we can't agree on everything.
Have to be in each other's DMs or on Twitter or whatever, yelling at each other for other people to read. Well, James, thanks so much for breaking this all down. Again, I'll have a link to James's opinion piece about exactly what we're talking about concerning the Corbyn's newest party. Also, I would check out, if you're interested in this similar topic, to look at James's book, Progressive Pragmatism: How Can We Work Together and What Do We Do Next? As well as follow James on socials and go to his website to look at all of his new work. You've got Substack as well. People can check out all that. Will be in the links below. But just go ahead and share where people can follow you, what you got going on. And I also play a song at the end always, whenever any music is referenced. So you get to pick the song that plays at the end as well.
Good. Okay. I think for me, my main focus at the moment is my TV broadcast and stuff. So I've been doing regular debates. I can reveal as an exclusive to the Powerless podcast that I've been blacklisted by one of the right-wing kind of channels in Britain, one of the prominent ones. I can't say who yet, but it's the one that I'm not appearing on, clearly. So they've I had a big dispute with them about one of their presenters being racist, in my opinion. I had the dispute with producers, and I've not been booked since. And another producer's told me that I'm not getting booked again because they're really trying to crack down on too much criticism. So it's interesting. But as a result, I'm going to try and do more alternative media. I'm going to try and do more podcasts. I'm going to try and do stuff like that, because I do have a position of privilege in being on the mainstream media quite regularly, contracted with the BBC, with Sky News and stuff. And it's great. It is wonderful, but you don't get to have conversations like we've had. You don't get to have those conversations. It's not back and forth. It's just me shouting into what feels like a void a lot of the time, which can be quite tiring. So, that's the thing. Follow me. I only use Instagram. It's the only socials that I'm on now. It's at James Mathewson Official. I'm on there, and I try to share clips whenever I can from bits and pieces. And my website as well, jamesmathewson.com, is on there. And just make sure if people want to follow me, if people want to drop me a message, any Americans especially, I talk about American politics a lot, but it is informed by the very few Americans in my life. So, I'm always welcome to hearing what people are thinking about things, especially on the side of progressive politics.
Absolutely. Again, thanks so much for going over all of this. It's been a great conversation. And again, to put you on the spot, you got to pick the song to play us out here.
God, I'm trying to think. Let's see what's on my most recent listen to. Calvin Louise were the ones that brought us together, I guess. I do like their new one, The Abyss.
Yeah, that's great.
Maybe, title track from their album. Yeah,
sure, that'll be great. Yeah, fantastic song. It's a good pick. All right, we're going to play The Abyss from Calvin Louise at the end of this with my conversation with James Mathewson. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Amazing. Thank you, mate.